afternoon. Welcome back to the Guyana Extractive Sector Transparency Week. My name is Kiri Sabaslai. I am the producer and the host for some of the conference today and going on this week until Friday afternoon. It is my great pleasure to welcome you back. If you have joined the event this morning, the opening ceremony and the presentation on why transparency matters from Eiti. And if you are new to our conference today, welcome. We are so glad that you could make it on a Monday afternoon. We have some very interesting topics in store for you. And we are going to kick off this afternoon with the civil society. And the presentation that is coming up is Civil Society, Experiences and Lessons Learned in Governance, Communications, and Environmental Justice. It is a panel conversation with many of our esteemed friends from civil society. And before we get started, I just like to share a few thoughts about the importance of this presentation today. With GYEITI in its infancy stage, continued discoveries of oil and gas reserves and ongoing growth in sectors such as mining, forestry, and fishing sectors, civil society are pivotal in strengthening transparency and accountability. Our panelists are founding members of the GYEITI multi-stakeholder group representing civil society. They set the foundation for the work to come. They have played a valuable role in setting the stage for civil society on the multi-stakeholder group. And this civil society-led panel today will showcase some of the important work that has been done in the extractives and how lessons learned can be applied to improve sector transparency, to improve environmental justice, and to bridge knowledge gaps about the sector and importance of information disclosure. And our esteemed panelists today are Mr. Curtis Bernard, who is the co-chair of the civil society component of the multi-stakeholder group, Mr. Mike McCormack, the convener of Policy Forum Guyana and the co-president of the Guyana Human Rights Association. And we are expecting Ms. Wanda Radzik, gender and environmental activist, to join us. Hopefully she can overcome some of the technical challenges she's facing from where she's joining today's virtual webinar. Hopefully she will be able to join us, and this will be our esteemed panel of speakers on civil society. And with that, I would like to give this over to Mr. Curtis Bernard.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kitty, for the introduction. I guess just one point to actually clarify that I'm the outgoing co-chair for civil society as we await the reconstitution of the MSG. But thank you for the opportunity to share a bit about my own experience and I think by extension the experience of civil society thus far in what is formally a 4-year period so far, but that extends much further back than 2017, February 15, 2017, when the MSG was officially launched. And I think for me, therein lies the very first lesson from a civil society standpoint that I'd like to share, in that there really needs to be a continued political will and drive really to ensure that initiatives like EITI can continue and make the kind of impact that they potentially can make in really transforming how natural resources, which from our perspective, we see really by the Constitution as being owned by all of the people of Guyana and should be managed in a manner to benefit all of the people of Guyana. And that was and still is a central drive of, I think, every member of the civil society component of the MSG. And while not speaking on the behalf of government or industry, I would dare say as well, the members of the government and industry sector of the MSG. And moving on to really what I would consider the second lesson is linked there, in that I think for this kind of novel arrangement where we have government, civil society, and industry sitting at the same table and really having equal power rather than one trying to wield its power only to the benefit of itself, but rather to the collective, is extremely important if we are to really ensure that the natural wealth of Guyana that we extract would benefit all of the societies. If we think about it, the 350,000 square kilometers that is Guyana's space, and yes, I did say 350,000 square kilometers and not 215, because we also own a significant part of the Atlantic Ocean as part of our natural patrimony, and from which we do generate income from the extraction of natural resources. I think now that the oil and gas sector is well established, we are, as a country, we are having a much better understanding of that space, but we've relied on that space from an extractive standpoint in fisheries for as long as we've been living in this part of the world, and I think that's important to note. So really taking the standpoint of the ownership of the natural resources really being the patrimony of all Guyanese, EITI, I think, really presents an opportunity for the owners of the resources to receive objective information on the management and the monetization of those resources. And really, from our perspective, that's what we see the initiative, the EITI and Guyana's move in EITI to be really a tool to provide information for further action by civil society, by all actors, in improving the management of the natural resources. I mentioned that the EITI movement in Guyana, or the work towards EITI, dates back, I think, to somewhere around 2010 to 2011. And that move was really has survived changes in political leadership, which I mentioned is in my opinion, commendable. And in 2017, the 15th of February 2017, when the MSG was launched and the members of the MSG from the civil society, industry, and government sectors were identified, at least from a personal standpoint, I had a bit of a worry, and again, just sharing lessons, I had a bit of a worry as to how it is that we were actually going to try to, how it is that we're actually going to find, not only try to find, how it is we're going to find a common ground on which these three sectors, which many times we consider to have very different not only perspectives, but priorities and opinions, how it is that we were actually going to try to even get on the same page in what EITI should try to accomplish within Guyana. And to me, this was probably one of the more encouraging aspects that really made me felt that there was hope for us really to achieve this, one of the very first joint sessions we had, the task was to really for us to define what we consider the national priorities for EITI. And what was surprising about it for me is that the three sectors met before a joint session that we had together to identify from our own perspectives what are the areas we felt EITI and Guyana ought to be focused on so that we can then build a work plan to work towards it. And what was surprising about it is that when we got together and we presented what we individually spoke of in our own caucuses, that there was, I would say, almost completely full alignment with each other. And out of that session, we actually identified 4 things that we together felt that they would be the national priorities as to where we would like to lead EITI in Guyana. The first was to create an enabling environment within which the extractive industry in Guyana, by advocating, promoting, and embracing and upholding the following. And there's a long list of things that include maintaining a level and fair playing field, observance of the rule of law, equity and fairness, efficient management, building trust, competitiveness, and preventing corruption and so on. And I wouldn't go through the entire list. The second area that we decided to focus on was to develop and enhance the relationship with the citizenry of Guyana as the owners of the resource with the extractive industry through transparency and good governance, adherence to fairness and so on, and connecting the citizenry to the data and the information about the management of the sector. The third area was to establish and maintain a comprehensive system to ensure the perpetual, sustainable, corporate social responsibility by focusing on consistently building capacity within the sector. And again, there are a set of key sub-areas, including the role of the citizenry, government, and companies within the framework of corporate social responsibility. And the fourth, and probably most important area, was to provide accurate reporting on revenues and payments from natural resource extraction and beneficial ownership of the privileges within the industry, supported by sound data collection and management. So those were the 4 areas that we, as a collective, really worked towards. And I think that was one of the success areas. I think the other is really evident in the terms of reference that we were able to put together as an MSG, jointly putting together our own terms of reference, and even getting to the point where rather than having one chair sit, we've actually agreed to have 3 co-chairs with equal power and a rotating chair to allow each of the sectors to chair the proceedings of EITI during its course. So I spent quite a lot of time on the positives. And actually, there's one other I'd like to connect to this having a common vision. I think having that common vision really helped us to persevere through all of the challenges that we have had over the past 4 years or so to actually produce 2 reports. They may not be perfect reports in terms of really capturing every dollar and every all of the bits of information that really ought to be captured within the report to provide to the citizenry, as I pointed out. But within the circumstances and the challenges that we would have faced over the period, which I think we will share a bit more of, we were actually able to persevere to have 2 reports made published thus far. And I think one of the areas where we really do have to improve and I think this is a challenge for the incoming MSG and all of the support that will be around the new MSG, is really ensuring that the information that we generate it can be presented and really dissected and presented to the general public in a manner that would be of much more use than a several thousand-page report with annexes and so on, so that there is a much more easily consumable product that comes out of all of the hard work that really goes into being able to reconcile the revenue flow streams within the sector. As we feel, as I mentioned before, the information that is generated through the EITI process is probably the most powerful product and tool that is provided. And I think Mike is going to speak about what I consider to be the other very powerful product that really comes out of the work in the way that EITI is set up as well. In terms of challenges, I think there have been quite a few. Given that this is a very new and novel approach to getting things done in Guyana and making decisions, of course, there were areas where we have not gone as far as we probably could have. But again, keeping in mind that this is a new approach and a completely new style and way of governing resources and making decisions around anything to do with the management of resources. Some of it is understandable. I think we really need to ensure that as we go forward, that the management of the work of EITI itself, of GYEITI, is really receiving the kind of attention that it requires and have the kind of leadership that it requires to ensure that when the multi-stakeholder group meets and make decisions, that those decisions are properly resourced and properly staffed to actually be executed. For me, in terms of smaller lessons, I would, or smaller but significant lessons, I would consider that to be another. And especially as we step into really full implementation of EITI, having gone through 2 reporting periods, get on the cusp really of having our first validation exercise, we would also need to recognize that the initiative globally is, or has moved rather, beyond only the reconciling of the financial flows, where it started and still remains to be the central focus of this initiative, to also include reporting on other aspects such as beneficial ownership, so that there's much more information that's made public about exactly whom are the holders of privileges and licenses to operate within the extractive sector, and who are really the ultimate beneficiaries of those privileges and licenses, as well as focusing on the impact of the extractive sector on gender and how it is that we can report information on things like employment within the sector from a gender perspective, and really having gender disaggregated data on the benefits, the overall benefits of the exploitation of the sector. And the third very much important area that the initiative is moving towards, that I think has real significance for Guyana as we continue to pursue sustainable development, a sustainable development model, through low carbon development is the impact of the providing transparent information on the impact of the extractive sector on the environment as a whole. The two reports that we have that we've produced so far have only touched on those areas more from the contextual standpoint. And I think efforts need to be made to move to having more formalized reporting on those aspects of the management of the natural resources of Guyana. As the civil society co-chair for about 3 years now, I can say that my experience working with my colleague co-chairs as co-chairs of the sector, of the initiative, the GYEITI, and again being a new initiative, has been a pleasant one. There have been instances where, of course, we would have seen things differently. But I'm thankful that we have, again, because we started off from a place of having a common purpose, we would have been able to work through those differences and help to lead the MSG and lead the work of GYEITI forward. So with that, and before I close off, of course, I'd like to thank my colleague, civil society members who would have placed the trust and responsibility in me to be the co-chair of the civil society sector, and to the entire MSG for the cooperation that we've had over the years of implementing EITI. And I hope that as we really step into this realm, and as we, I know that the focus of GYEITI, or the focus many times from the public, seems to be on only oil and gas revenues, but within our definition of extractives, we've actually included fisheries and forestry, which are renewable resources, because we felt that it was important to be able to capture as much of the revenue that comes from the extraction of any resource within Guyana, whether it be renewable or non-renewable. So with that, Kitty, I would end here and open up, I think, for Mike to make his presentation before we open up for questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bernard. Before we move on to Mr. McCormack, if you don't mind, there is a very specific question to your presentation. Are you up for one question?
Certainly.
All right. So the question is that you mentioned 2 reports. Where can these public reports be accessed online?
Right. So the reports, all of the reports are available on the GYEITI website, for which I think we can provide a link in the chat, or can provide that in the information. But if I do recall the URL, please don't hold me to this, but I think it is gyeiti.org.gy.
We can definitely put that in the chat. So for all of you who are interested in these 2 reports, you can definitely go online and take a look at them. And with that, Mr. McCormack, we are ready for your part.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Kitty, for the introduction. For my part, I will reflect on the experience of being a member of the multi-stakeholder committee of the GYEITI over the last 4 years. And while the EITI is understandably known to focus on its goal of injecting greater clarity into the financial flows in the extractive sector and things of that nature, I would like to focus on what drew me into the EITI, which, more than its useful purpose was the manner in which it functioned. In other words, it was that as a decision-making process in our circumstances in Guyana, that I feel Guyana, the EITI is valuable. And I'll explain that a little bit and then evaluate whether my original idea that it was useful is being valid as a result of the experience. A word for the benefit of people who may be participating in this conference who are not familiar with our background, particularly political background in Guyana. So this is a very brief introduction, but it explains why EITI is important. Guyanese politics for decades has been characterized by denouncing, confronting, monopolizing, boycotting, that kind of confrontation. And if compromise is the essence of politics, I think you could defend the fact that we don't have politics in Guyana. We don't do politics because there's no room for compromise. But ironically, this is discouraging, though it may seem. It's the circumstances in which the EITI approach to decision-making actually works best, where there is very little trust amongst the members, initially perhaps. But certainly in political life, it's very, very, very strong. In other words, the EITI does not assume trust between the different sectors that make up the board. Nor is collective governance a one-off solution. It's a constant process of learning a skill of how to compromise and take decisions, and it has to be worked at, and it requires long-term cooperation. Your average state commission or statutory body tends to vest power in the chair. A debate is usually followed by the chair saying, well, thank you everyone for your contributions. Now here's what we're going to do. Now that EITI can't function like that. Each of the three sectors, business, government, and civic, have equal powers. They have equal numbers of representation, equal, in other words, in terms of numbers. In the sector, we had 4 from each sector, and no decision can be taken without the participation of all sectors. So even one person on a sector has to agree. What it means is that and this is where it's unusual with respect to other statutory bodies, the government is a member like the other 2 sectors. It has to argue its case, in other words. And the whole thing is a very healthy approach to decision making, because the focus is on consensus. I can't recall in 4 years a decision we didn't take by consensus. I could be wrong, but it would have been an isolated decision if we've had to vote. So collective government of this nature has to build trust to overcome this unfamiliarity of working in awkward alliances, if you like. Focusing on modest goals is the key. You can't be ambitious if you're not, if you're starting to learn how to work with other people. So that consensus on small things builds up momentum so that you can get to meaningful later on. The initial focus is on actually agreeing on some things. And so you move from modest to meaningful. And that consensus helps generate momentum. It works best when all sides have something to gain if it succeeds, and lots to lose if it doesn't succeed. And it's important that each stakeholder needs to feel some sense of a win on important issues. Now, to what extent did we succeed in this? If we do, well, into sort of the lessons learned part of this bit. I think it would be fair to say the collective nature of governance largely succeeded in GYEITI. And specific reasons which contributed to that, in my view, were the role of the EITI champion, who has been, since the inception, the Minister of Natural Resources. Originally, Minister Trotman was there when we launched in EITI, and he set a tone of sort of hands-off and independence and encouraging the EITI to get on with it. There was no defensiveness about his relationship with what we may decide and things of that nature, which is absolutely the right tone. And it's been continued by his successor at the present under the new administration. A second feature is something mentioned by Curtis in respect to the co-chairs of each section rotated in running meetings. So there are strengths and weaknesses to that approach, but by and large, it does emphasize that each sector is equal, and you develop skills to chair meeting of this nature. The third feature was that the EITI was a strange animal in terms of the ministerial organization, because it wasn't really an agency or a department of the ministry, but at the same time it has to function within the framework of a government agency because it's funded by the state. It's still a work in progress in terms of that aspect. But we were fortunate that the permanent secretary in the MRE and Natural Resources was very laid back about ensuring that the EITI was as flexible, could get the flexibility it needed, and that helped. As I say, there's things to do. Another feature of why I feel we had an easy birth, if you like, was the support we received from the Trinidad and Tobago chapter of EITI. They were very helpful in the early stages. What didn't work quite well in this collective governance process, and which we should recognize as sort of weaknesses, would be some of the following. We failed to get the cooperation of a significant sector of the gold mining community. And I think that was influenced by a sort of unproductive debate about voluntary or mandatory submissions from the sector. I don't think the processes of EITI were well enough explained to the miners and the mining sector. And one of the consequences of that was reflected in the report, where a number of the producers didn't feel confident about cooperating with it. That's a challenge for EITI as much as it is for the mining sector. Another feature, I think, is the one I've already made, that we need to find a formula whereby GYEITI operates on a more decentralized basis, and that the Secretariat is encouraged and has to take initiatives to promote the independence of the ministerial framework. Another issue affecting GYEITI is that the legislation relevant to confidentiality of tax returns needs to be addressed. People producing information for the companies producing information for GYEITI need to feel confident that the information that is genuinely personal or private is respected, but at the same time there is a mandate for EITI for information to be made clear and transparent. And we haven't quite got that right because the legislation never anticipated EITI. So that has to be worked on in the next round. I would I think another shortcoming of our period in office is the relationship of GYEITI to the broader society. We didn't communicate adequately the contents of the report, the way that the report is limited. Some people, the report attracts various criticisms. One is it's far too complicated and ordinary people can't understand it. That's a challenge to a more friendly way in which information is communicated. Another criticism is that there is no trisecting of the information. In other words, that no EITI doesn't compare the information it receives from the private sector from the information that the government sector produces in terms of the monies that companies have paid through royalties, taxes, licenses, and so on. But that criticism is misplaced. The EITI cannot get into analyzing why the funding is the way it is, or why this person paid so much and somebody else didn't pay that, and so on. That's the job of civil society. The job of EITI, which is very difficult, is to get to the point where both parties, the information from government and the information from the sector, is presented to the society. It's for other organizations, the trade unions, the professions, the NGOs, to analyze that information as to why it is the way it is. Our job is to enable them to do that by the way we present the information in a friendly manner. The other issue I want broadly to touch on of a government nature, because Vanda is not with us, she was going to do this, is the selection process for getting onto the EITI board. Each sector is responsible for a method of selecting its representatives. We had 4 reps and 4 alternates. The Policy Forum Guyana was asked by the previous minister originally asked the Guyana Human Rights Association if we would organize the selection process for civic. Guyana Human Rights Association responded to him that we were privileged to be asked, but we thought Policy Forum Guyana is a broader umbrella, a network of civic organizations, and would be more appropriate. Policy Forum Guyana then sat down, he agreed. So Policy Forum sat down and we worked out a method whereby an independent panel of 3 persons who were well respected in the society in general, didn't have anything to do with Policy Forum, but they were respected. They would be the panel that received applications from people who were interested. People who were interested through national advertisement in the national press were advised, if you wish to be on the board, you must submit an application that says something about yourself and your interests and your background, but also it should be supported by 3 letters from organizations, civic organizations that you have, that know of your work in the civic sector. You've either been a member, you've supported what they've done, or in other ways. And civil society goes is huge. You're talking trade unions, professions, faith-based, NGO, indigenous, and so on. What we did was that process I've outlined was set in motion. But before we did so, the Policy Forum organizations agreed that one of the 4 seats would be allocated to the indigenous communities, and that they would figure out a way that suited them to choose the person and the alternate, which they did. Policy Forum, the selection process for the other 3 spaces was done according to the process I've outlined. The only thing we recommended to the panel of selectors was, please don't discount young people who would otherwise be good candidates, but who don't have experience. because while it is a complicated, not complicated, it's a complex issue committee to be on in terms of the nature of what we deal with. So young people will not, by and large, you're going to find a lot of them who are very familiar already with how these kind of decisions are made. So we recommended, if a young person has all the other qualities you think are needed, except that, think of it this way: we could appoint young people to be the representatives, and the older persons can be the alternates, so they can advise younger people about the decisions, but the young people will be taking the decisions. And they respected that. The civic panel was largely young people, and people like myself and Vanda, we are alternates on the system. Just a final comment before I finish here. My view on, did the EITI work from a governance point of view? Was my original attraction to this agency on the basis of the governance thing justified? I think it was. I think in Guyana, we need to replicate this consensus approach to political decision-making wherever possible. And members should be chosen who genuinely represent the constituencies that select them. We don't want a committee that's a proxy for ethnic groups or political parties. Decision-making in the sector needs to range beyond the political class. There's a whole range of issues relating to extraction which are simply not being discussed. Caps on mining and petroleum production, the use of the Natural Resource Fund, the fossil fuel versus renewables debate, compensation for deferred production. All of these issues require multi-partisan and non-partisan compromises. Another feature of that is that intergenerational access is not institutionalized in any of our processes so far. I think it was vindicated in the EITI, but it's a token recognition for the most part. Privileging the views of business leaders or consultants and experts over the views of ordinary citizens in the political decision-making process needs to be weakened. If we have to broaden that base, render it vulnerable to, it's rendered vulnerable to corruption. So ultimately, the success of the EITI has to be measured by how its information has contributed to achieving a mobilizing of indignation over extractivism and climate change. And the main challenge to achieving that mobilization is that ordinary people need to be, we have to use clear language, not the terms, technical terms that we normally discussing. And people have to be engaged who have no idea how forests are linked to rising sea levels, or whose future is tomorrow, not 10 or 15 years away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. McCormack. We have a handful of questions. So I'd like to bring back our other panelist, Mr. Bernard, together, and let's see if we can have a few questions for you. Now, the first one that came in many minutes ago, the question is, how comfortable is the EITI committee with the current makeup of the EPA to police natural resources infractions? Do they have the required human resources?
Maybe I can take a go at this, as I think it's a fairly simple answer. I think any view that either Mike or myself express here would need to be a personal view, and I would prefer to reserve any personal comments I have here. But really, just to clarify, that the EITI movement, at least from my understanding, is not one that has a regulatory, a policing, or an advocacy purpose. The sole purpose of the EITI process, as I understand it, really is to provide objective, verifiable information to the public, so that information can then be utilized to make decisions. The group does not, the initiative does not have a responsibility to comment and create opinions about itself as a body, to create opinions and so on about the management of natural resources. I think Mike alluded to that in some senses, to comparing revenue streams and so on. What we do is really provide the objective information, as I said, on the flows of revenues from companies to the government. And in some places in the world, EITI also tracks funding from central government to regional and local government, and where those resources are utilized. And more it's going towards reporting information on who the beneficial owners of rights and privileges and licenses, as well as on the impact of the sector on gender and on the environment. So as EITI and even as the civil society members of the MSG, at least from my perspective, there isn't an opinion that would have been formed by either civil society members or by the broader MSG on things like the makeup of the EPA and the quality or the provisions within any license, whether it be gold, sandstone, oil and gas, fisheries, or anything of that nature.
Could I make just one quick comment there? Is I think that the EPA is a prime candidate for a mechanism such as the EITI enjoys in terms of its board. I don't know how the board of EPA is constituted, but I think it would, because of the difficult questions and controversies that it faces, a board that represents the sectors that are most affected by its decisions would be a very good move. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bernard and Mr. McCormack. Thank you for both of them chiming in into answering this question. Now, here is the next one. How does one participate as part of Guyana civil society in EITI? What are the qualifications needed? And how does one get nominated to represent civil society?
Well, I hope part of the latter part of the question was answered by the way I outlined what was the previous selection process. It's important to recognize that the life of the EPA came to an end, sorry, not the EPA, sorry, of the MSG came to an end in April, and a new committee needs to be selected. The minister is the person who will appoint the organization responsible for the selection, or will determine what the selection commission is. But part of the answer to the question we are all waiting for is what that will look like. That will determine the nature of participation on the board. In terms of participating in the EITI process as a whole, many organizations could benefit from work on the report that enables them in a more friendly manner to access the recommendations of the report, and then organizations can take measures to pressure for their implementation. I don't know if anything, Curtis wants to add to anything there.
I think you've covered it well enough, Mike.
Very good. Thank you so much for your answers. I hope it was helpful for people wondering about how the next multi-stakeholder group is going to be selected. Now, the next question we have is about oil production reports. Does EITI track these oil production reports? It seems there is nothing on the website.
All right, so if I might speak to that, very briefly, or very quickly rather. So oil production, in terms of the EITI standard, there is also some movement towards being able to provide that kind of data on a real-time basis. And there is some reporting that can be implemented. However, over the past 4 years or so, what the MSG is really focused on is getting the foundation of this initiative going. I think we've done, under the circumstances, we've done a fair job at this, and it's really for the next MSG to build on that and to build in the features, for example, on our website, as we start that level of more almost real-time reporting on things like production and so on, to have that data available on the website. But I think it is a very good next step to be making in this movement.
Thank you, Mr. Bernard. Now, the next question is about mainstreaming. What is the biggest challenge working in mainstreaming and disclosure, in your opinion?
Mike, should I go first?
Yes, do, please. Yeah.
I think, and I know sometimes I get accused of wearing rosy lenses, but I try to ensure that my lenses are clear in a sense. I think the challenge is that, one, this level of transparency and disclosure is very new to Guyana, and I think the biggest challenge to me is partly cultural in that sense, in that we have to get over the view sometimes that data of this nature is privileged in some way, and that it will be used for ill purposes if made public. And we're working on that. The fact that we have disclosures and so on within the report, I think, is a good start. The other thing which contributes to that as well is that our systems, and Mike made mention of, for example, the tax and confidentiality issues around disclosing those kinds of revenue streams and being able even to access the information to be able to report, as well as the way that the systems of collecting data are disaggregated. So it takes a tremendous amount of effort to be able to take the information from the various agencies and to be able to reconcile all of the payments from individual companies who are paying monies into various places, and to present that in a way that is more coherent. So if you take that even a notch up, to be able to have these kinds of disclosures being made routinely, then I think the biggest hurdle is work on the system of collecting and reporting on payments, so that the information can be made much more seamlessly and much more easily available to the public. So for me, the biggest hurdles are, one, the way the systems are currently set up, which has some sense of or is influenced by the regulatory environment at the moment. And I think as well, from my own personal perspective, I think it's more, the other factor is more one of a culture of being more guarded towards the provision of data, especially when it has to do with finances.
Thank you,
Mike, I don't know if there's
Bernard.
anything you'd like to add there.
No, I think that's fine.
That's wonderful. Now we have one quick last question. Have you tried to have the two reports you've mentioned covered by major media news outlets? My own reaction to that, as someone who has not actually been very involved with the communications side of EITI, is that it's an area that we need to give much greater priority to in the future. I think everybody in EITI is conscious that we have been weak
in terms of communicating many aspects of, and the sheer presentation of the report. I mean, the first report is about 6,000 pages on the website, and it was just all up there. And now what people made of it, I don't know. So that was my short answer is we have to do a lot more work on communication.
Yeah, I agree with Mike on that, but I think to their credit, some of the news outlets in there, and especially on the first report, did pick up quite a bit of the report and had reporting around the information in the report. But I agree completely with Mike that there is, and I also alluded to it in my my statements earlier, there's a lot of work that we need to do to be able to make the information that's generated by EITI much more consumable and palatable to the wider society for it really to make sense. It's very difficult for anyone to go through the thousands of pages that the reports contain, and therefore the efforts really to produce very strong communication pieces that can feed the reporting and the analysis by the media, I think is critical, and for consumption by the wider public as well.
Thank you so much. And I just like to express my my appreciation for our panelists today, for Mr. Bernard and Mr. McCormack. We are honored to have you both here, share your experience, share your knowledge, your perspective and opinions. It is really great honor to have you here today and to contribute to the Guyana's Extractive Sector Transparency Week, setting the stage for civil societies and civil involvement for the rest of the week. We are envisioning a really lively conversation as our conference is going on. I would like to share with you our agenda and what is in store for all of our participants for the remainder of the day. At 2:30 p.m., we have another panel discussion on Guyana's natural governance and transparency policies. After that, we have friends from Trinidad and Tobago to share their experience using EITI data to inform public policy and dialogue. And the last panel for the day is starting at 5 p.m. It is about competing interests in the extractive sector, how to reduce risks and conflict and reap benefits. And after a good day worth of work, we are going to unwind together in an informal cocktail networking event. If you'd like to join us in a friendly environment to connect with each other, to learn about each other, to network with each other, join us at 6:30 p.m. I put important links in the chat for you. So please go ahead and take a look at the chat and save some of these links for yourself. Lastly, I do want to bring your attention to the Guyana Extractive Sector Transparency Survey. It is a survey that is available on the website, and we are encouraging our participants throughout the week to complete it. And as we get the results, they are real-time updated, and you can take a look what others are thinking about the state of transparency in Guyana in the extractive sectors. So we are really aiming to capture some of your perspectives and your perceptions and shed some lights on what is the general understanding of the state. Now, this is real-time updating, so you can always visit our website and take a look at our survey results. And what I have on the screen is still the agenda. Please go ahead and join us for the afternoon sessions. We would love to have you back. For now, we are going to take a quick break, and we will see you back at 2:30 with Guyana's National Governance and Transparency Policy Panel. And for now, I'd like to say thank you for Mr. Bernard and Mr. McCormack for the wonderful presentation, for answering all of the questions that the audience had, and for enriching the discussion that we started our Transparency Week with. Have a great afternoon, and I hope to see you back at 2:30.